Hi everybody, I wanted to show you a typical grid layout. Now the reason we'd want to use this is because we have more control of positioning than we would with a table layout. And keep in mind this can work fine with a flex container. But for a grid system, I want to show you a typical layout. So I'm going to hit refresh here, and this will be attached to your video that's going to be published. But anyway, when we start with our container, what's imperative is that you have a display of grid. If we don't have that, none of the grid properties will be applied. So here we have a header and several other categories. When I do grid like this, it acts like a table, so we have a grid system. Now let's talk about the grid template rows. This is one property that says that this layout is going to have 4 rows, and it's going to be 100 pixels, 200 pixels, 400 pixels, and 100 pixels again. So let's talk about this. This is the row height on each one of them. So if I take like this and I go 50, 20, something like that, you can see it's increasing that specific row. Okay. Now if I add 600 pixels like that, we go to the bottom and we get a 600 pixel block. So basically we are declaring our entire layout. And it's a little bit different way of thinking, but it works great if you are tableting data or tabling data, and it works really good if you just have an adaptive site, or if you're willing to go in with a flex layout with data like this, okay, or with just fixed table widths. So right now we have 1,000 width around our header. We have our display grid and the rows we've talked about. Now what is this? Now the FR is a fractional. If you read the book, it's very in-depth and it does a great job covering it, but I wanted to take a different approach this week and show you a layout done completely with a grid. So what we've done here is we're repeating 3 columns and 1 fractional. So what does this mean? Well, if we move the repeat to 4, look what happened. The one column that has multiple elements in it suddenly has a 4th column. If I do 2, now we have 2, and the fractional will take care of the remaining area. So basically, if I do repeat 3 200 pixels right now, and I inspect that one character, it's going to have the column around it that is that width. Okay, so let's hit refresh again, and we'll talk about this right here. So what if I did 2? Now 1 fractional, 2 fractionals, 3 fractionals, 4 fractionals. It doesn't matter because the repeat is what is creating the columns. Okay, so right now I have repeat 3, but let's say I did 200 pixels like that. That would be 200 pixels. But really we want the 1 FR so it divvies up the remainder. So that's a little bit more. Now I'll watch the difference again. Like let's say I do 200 pixels like this. You see that we pushed over, but the 1 FR is going to create a gap space that has a perfect fit right here. And you notice if I do 2 FR, it doesn't change because that's what a fractional is. It's the remaining space. So when we go over here and inspect all the widths on this, you'll see this is 200 pixels wide. You'll see here, if we inspect this, this is 336 pixels. So basically, repeat 3, the fractal is taking the remaining amount. Excuse me. Now the grid gap is the 30 pixels in between. So watch what happens if I shrink it. That's the gap for the entire container. So in the container, the wrapper, you're fixing the grid itself. And like this brown right here, if you look at this one element inside here, why isn't it 3 columns? Well, if we look, we're showing how much it takes up. So if we do grid row, this goes from all the way from 3 to 4. So if we go 2, we're seeing the row go from 3 to 4. So this is 3rd row and 4th row. Okay. If we wanted to do grid row 3 to 5, you would see it would extend further. But you have to visualize the grid to see what it's doing. Okay. So let's take each one of these in order. We've got our header. This is a 1 minus 1, meaning it's going to be one column that spans the entire width. So basically it starts at the first line and ends at the -1 line, which is this. Now remember, our first row, this is 1, 2, 3, it's got the 4 rows. It's got repeat 3 with a gap and 400 and 200. So that's 1, 2, 3. Those are the columns. This right here is one column entirely. So if I do this, watch what happens. It has a starting point and not an ending point. So if I did 4, or let's do 4, there's 4 right there. Or I could do 5, and there's the 5 there. But by doing the 1 minus 1, you get the whole thing. So this is that range, 1, 5. Okay. So I'm going to refresh so we get the same value. As long as you understand that divider sign is the range. So it goes from the first line all the way back to the minus line. It's the same as saying let's start at 1 and span 5. Alright, so the next thing right here, this is it's nothing more than styling that one element, because this is where the grid actually takes control. This is in that second row. So this is item 3. And again, you see nothing more than values inside there. The only thing that has been gridded is that top level, because it needed to span all the other ones. This blue 5, for example, is grid row 2 to 4. That means it's row 1, or row 2, row 3, and row 4. I can easily change that by doing grid 2, 3, which means it starts at the 2 and ends at the 3. Or I could do this as these overlap, so I can do 1, 2. See that? So it pushed everything down. But the things that span more than one row and more than one column are the ones that will get the grid properties. So let's take brown, for example. Brown, we already know, goes 3 to 4, but what about this? 1 minus 2. So basically it's saying we've got this one column, and then we're going from the end, the span end, and going -1, -2. So we can manipulate this too and play around and get an idea for it. So there's -3, -4, -5. So -2 is this. If we do -1, it's the whole thing, just like the header. Or we could do 1, 4, which means we start at the 1 and span 4 over. And the footer is very much like the header in the fact that it has a grid row of 4. Excuse me, let me take a good look at this. And going down to 5 in the rows, and the columns again span 1 minus 1, which is the whole thing. So again, that would be equal to 1, 5, because it's the start and the end. So this week, it's a good idea just to get the hang of these grid systems based on the styles at play. So it's pretty easy. It's a nice layout. And for homework, I'm going to give you a layout that's very similar to this, and you can grid it up. Okay? Any questions, you know where to reach me.